Shalom, everybody. It's good to be with you again. The topic, once again, is Judaism today. And where we have planned on going in our course scope and sequence is to talk about the emergence of Judaism today, the expressions of Judaism today, and the evaluation of Judaism today. Last session, we looked at the emergence of Judaism today. In this session, we'll be looking at the expressions of Judaism today, the mainline branches, if you will, of Judaism. I love Jewish humor. Perhaps you've heard this before. If you have two Jews, then you have three opinions. This is actually a Yiddish proverb that's funny, but it's also very insightful. You can actually see this in action in the Talmud. We talked about the Talmud in our last session, especially among the ancient rabbis. To Jewish rabbis, seems like there are three opinions going back and forth. But you can also see it in much of Jewish life today. In fact, there's often a debate among our Jewish friends, sometimes even fierce disagreement when it comes to politics, but particularly religion. For example, there have been numerous debates and clashes between the Haredi, which are the ultra-Orthodox in Israel, and the Reform and conservative branches of Judaism about who can access the Kotel, the Western Wall. And the Reform and conservative branches want access to the wall to be egalitarian. In other words, you have the men and women at the wall together and having equal access. But the Haredi don't want any changes. They want men and women to continue to be separated. As you can see, there's a dividing fence between the two. On the left side, you have the men, and on the right side, you have the women. So there's a division there. There's a clash. Underlying, really, this whole issue, and one that's not confined to the state of Israel alone, but is relevant to Jewish people in the diaspora, is the question, who is a Jew? How do you define that? And who gets to decide who is a Jew? So those are two main questions that's underlying all of this. The Jewish Agency for Israel states on their website that according to the 1950 Israel Law of Return, they say every Jew has the right to immigrate to Israel. Okay, that's great. Every Jew has a right to immigrate to Israel. But that begs the question, who is a Jew? So they go on to say, for the purposes of this law, a Jew is someone who is born to a Jewish mother. Okay, that's one qualification. Or a Jew is someone who converts to Judaism. But for both of those, it cannot be a member of another religion. So that's how the Jewish Agency for Israel qualifies and defines who is a Jew. And they need to do that if they're going to allow every Jew has the right to immigrate to Israel, as they say on their website. But the Jewish Agency for Israel also states on their website, therefore, you will need to present legalized original documentation, including birth certificates, or I guess you would only have one, a birth certificate, a family status documents, criminal background check, You have to have a valid passport. And here's the kicker: proof of your connection to Judaism. Proof of your connection to Judaism. So then you could ask, okay, what kind of proof do I need? Well, they go on to say, to prove your connection to Judaism, you must present a letter written by an affiliated rabbi of an affiliated Jewish community. Okay, now that sounds easy enough. If you're Jewish, all you need to do is go to your rabbi and say, can you write a letter saying that I'm actually connected to Judaism? However, in Israel, to answer the questions, who is a Jew and who gets to decide who is a Jew, the debate really has been primarily over the issues pertaining to what we just talked about, and that is conversion and how it affects Israel's law of return. So let's say if you're a Gentile here and you want to convert to Judaism, and then after you convert, you want to immigrate to Israel and become an Israeli citizen. So let's say you want to do all of that. The Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox, have said that all of that, your conversion, your immigration, has to be done according to halakha, which means Jewish law, and be recognized by rabbinical authorities for that conversion and the immigration to be valid. So they're saying it has to be done by the Orthodox way. But Reform and conservative Jews have disagreed and fought that concept in Israeli courts, stating that Reform and conservative Jews are just as Jewish as the Haredi. So again, you have this clash between these groups. Underlying it all, who is a Jew and who has the authority to define that? Well, in March of 2021, Israel's Supreme Court ruled that conversions to Judaism performed in Israel by Reform and conservative rabbis would be recognized for the purpose of the law of return, meaning that those converts would qualify for Israeli citizenship. So the Reform and the conservative branches, they actually won this debate. Went all the way to the Israeli Supreme Court. But the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox, strongly disagreed with the decision, believing that it could undermine the Jewishness of the one and only Jewish state. So, what makes the question, who is a Jew, according to Israel's law of return, so difficult is, number one, if you say you're born of a Jewish mother, that's really circular reasoning, because you're saying you're Jewish if you're born to a Jew. Well, what makes that person Jewish? Well, they would have to be born to a Jew, and then they'd have to be born to a Jew. And I assume you'd have to go all the way back to Abraham and Sarah in order to qualify. So it really doesn't answer the question. Well, what about conversion to Judaism? But the question then again is, which kind of Judaism? And then when they say you can't be a member of another religion, which is an interesting statement, because most Israelis themselves are not religious at all, not even of Judaism. So, this is the ultimate question in Judaism today. Who is a Jew and who gets to decide who is a Jew? And there is conflict and differences of opinion about that. Just to give you an idea, in Israel, 45.3% of Jews in the country define themselves as secular. That's almost half. But then if you combine that with 19.2% consider themselves marginally observant, so you have almost 65% saying that they're secular or just, barely observe a little bit. Then you have another 13.9% that say they're partially religious. 10.7 say, yes, I'm definitely religious. And then 10% are Haredi, what some call the ultra-Orthodox. Now, I don't want to bore you, hopefully, with a lot of statistics, but I want to share with you the results of a religious landscape study taking place here in the United States in 2023 to 2024 by the Pew Research Center. And again, I hope this doesn't bore you, but I think these statistics are very revealing. Now, last session I said this is too big of a topic, Judaism today, to try to cover the whole world of Judaism. So I'm going to bring in a little bit of Israeli and other places perspective, but primarily in the United States. 2% of U.S. Adults in this survey identify as being Jewish. This poll that was taken by the Pew Research Center was not a small sampling of U.S. adults. It was 37,000. Okay, a lot of TV polls, they only have like maybe 1,000 if they're doing a good job. This was 37. Well, 2% of those identify as being Jewish. Of those 2%, I want to show you what their perceptions are, what they identify with religiously. And what I'm going to do as I show you these statistics is I'm going to highlight what I think are the significant parts of them to point out why, as we said last session, why Judaism today is not biblical Judaism. So here's why. 27% of the Jewish people polled consider religion important in their life. 30% somewhat important, but 43% said it's not too or not at all important in their lives. 15% of them consider themselves very religious, 27% somewhat, but the majority, 50%, 56%, said they weren't religious at all. You have 15% attend religious service at least once a week, 8% once or twice a month, 26% a few times a year. But then here again, 50% of them seldom or never attend religious services. 11% participate in groups for prayer, scripture study, or religious education. 6% only do it once or twice a month. 6% several times a year, but 3/4 of them, 75%, say they never or seldom get involved religiously with a group. It doesn't mean that they don't get together for other purposes, but for religious purposes to get together, 3/4 of them don't do that. How about this? 29% of them believe in God, but 43% are agnostic and 26% are atheist. So you have over 2/3 of them that are either agnostic, I don't know if there's a God or not, or they'll say, no, there's definitely not a God. This is sad to me. These are the people of the book. These are the people who said to Moses, as we read last session, all of the words that the Lord has said, we will do. These are the people who had Moses, who had Samuel and all the other prophets, who had King David and all the kings. All of these great people of God. But today, they're agnostic or atheists, at least here in the United States. And I'm sure that these percentages aren't too far off in other countries as well. 16% say it's necessary to believe in God to be moral and have good values. But 82% say it's possible to be moral and have good values without believing in God. Along with that, 1/3, 33%, believe there are clear standards for what is right and wrong, but 66%, 2/3, believe that right or wrong depends on the situation. That's called situation ethics. So it just depends on your situation as to something is right or wrong. How about this? 39% of them believe in heaven. Over half, 57%, do not. 22% believe in the existence of hell. 3/4 of them do not believe there is a hell. Now, I don't know about you, but what that communicates to me, whether a person is Jewish or not, and this is what they believe about hell, what that communicates to me is they do not have a fear of the Lord. They do not have a fear of God, that one day they are going to be accountable to him. And this is why I believe 28% of them feel spiritual peace and well-being at least once a week, 14% once or twice a month, 20% several times a year, and 36% seldom or never have spiritual peace and well-being. So this tells me that almost 2/3, even though they don't believe in heaven, they don't believe in hell, they still feel pretty good about it all. To me, that's very disturbing. And it breaks my heart. It's very sad. Because as an evangelical Christian who believes the Word of God and who believes that Jesus is the promised Messiah, I know that whether a person is Jewish or Gentile, there's going to be a reckoning day. And we should be serious about the fact as to whether or not we as a human being are in right relationship with God. And so this is very disconcerting to me. I'm not judging my Jewish friends. I love my Jewish friends. I love the Jewish people. I love Israel. But if this landscape study by the Pew Research Center is even remotely accurate, it's very concerning for our Jewish friends. So if you put all of this polling together, or these statistics together, both in Israel and the United States, most Jewish people would generalize their identity as Jews as either I'm religious or I'm non-religious. That's how they would describe it. If you would ask them, they would just generally say, yeah, I'm not religious. Or they'd say, yeah, I am religious. So from there, you have a spectrum of practice and belief. And let me explain this spectrum. So you have the left and then you have the right. So on the left side, you have the non-observant, and then moving towards the right, you have the Reform branch, mainline branch of Judaism, then you have conservative, then you have Orthodox, and then you have the Hasidic branch of Judaism on this spectrum. Now you see the word Hasidic begins with a CH. Just a little Hebrew tidbit here. If you see a transliterated Hebrew word that's transliterated from Hebrew to English, and its first letter is translated like a CH, you do not pronounce it like a ch, like cherry in English. There is no ch sound in Hebrew. Instead, this is the best way they can try to transliterate it for the Hebrew letter chet. So you have to kind of have a guttural sound out of your throat, kind of clear your throat, if you will. Chet. So it's Hasidic. So just a little tidbit there, no charge for that. So this is the spectrum. So on this spectrum, where do you think on this spectrum, I probably gave you the answer already based on those polling, but where do you think on the spectrum most Jewish people are today? Well, if you said way over to the left on the non-observant side, you would be correct. But even within this spectrum, there are branches within a branch, subcultures within a culture. If you remember in the book of Acts, the Apostle Paul is on some of his journeys. He would go to different cities, and the first place he would often go to would be the synagogue to tell them that the Messiah has come. Well, when he went to the town of Berea, it says of the Jewish people there that they were more noble-minded than those in the city of Thessalonica because they searched the scriptures. So what that tells me that even in this little difference, or actually they weren't too far from each other in their locality in Asia Minor at that time, there were subcultures within cultures. Not all the Jewish communities were the same. Even today, American Jews are different than Russian Jews that are different from Israeli Jews. There are cultures within a culture. So, under Hasidic, if you just look at the Hasidic or the ultra-Orthodox or the Haredi, you have different sects, such as the Chabad. That's one sect. They're located in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. You have another Hasidic sect called the Satmars. They're in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And they have another Hasidic sect called the Jewish Renewal Group. They're more recent. They were started by a Hasidic rabbi in the 1960s. And that group focuses on spirituality, social justice, with more of a mystical, musical, and meditative practice. So just under Hasidic, that umbrella, there are different sects. And this is not all of them. You have quite a few more in Israel as well. And then under conservative, you have the Reconstructionist movement, which started in the 1920s out of the conservative branch. And the Reconstructionists, they see Judaism as the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. So as the Jewish people as a civilization changes, so is their religion. That's the Reconstructionist. We're not going to spend time on them. We don't have all the time to do that, along with the other branches. And then if you go all the way to the left, you have even humanistic Judaism today. That began really in the 1960s, early 1960s. They believe in creating a meaningful Jewish life free from supernatural authority. I'm quoting their website here. A meaningful Jewish life free from supernatural authority and in reviving the secular roots of Judaism. I didn't know Judaism had secular roots, but they say that they do. And they want a life free from supernatural authority, which means, in fact, on the humanist website where they talk about humanistic Judaism, the humanist website, on their logo underneath it, their motto is good without a God. Good without a God. So the idea is, and in fact, with humanistic Judaism, is we don't want to be under a supernatural authority who tells us what to do. We believe that we can be good without this overriding authority in our lives. Then, if you take all of these branches and sects and sub-branches in this religious spectrum, if you put all of these together, they can even be made up even a different way. You can be talking about Ashkenazic Jews who are mostly Eastern European in their origins, or you can talk about Sephardic Jews who have mostly a Spanish, Portuguese, Mediterranean origins. And Ashkenazic and Sephardic Jews, they all have their distinct cultural liturgies. When they do something in the synagogue, it's done a different way. And they pronounce even the Hebrew in different words. They pronounce them differently. So, as I shared last session, when I first started in Jewish ministry, I was pretty naive. I thought all Jewish people lived in Israel. I thought all Jewish people were still the same, like in Bible days. But as I've learned over the decades, Jewish people aren't the same. They're all over this spectrum. And this is why we're studying this tonight. So we don't have time to go over all of these different facets. So we're just going to focus on the three major branches of Judaism today. Remember, most are non-religious. So we're actually talking about the minority of those who actually identify with these three major expressions of Judaism. And that's the Orthodox, the Reform, and the Conservative. Now, as I've said before, I'm not Jewish. I don't have a Jewish background. And for Jewish friends who may watch this video at some point, you may say, oh, you're getting this all wrong. I might be. And at the risk of oversimplification, I have to, because of our time constraints, I have to take us on more of a 33,000-foot perspective, like you're looking down from an airplane. So I just want to, that's my disclaimer. I wasn't born Jewish. I tried to study and I'm still learning. And I always want to learn. But these are the three main branches we're going to focus on tonight. Let's talk about Orthodox Judaism. Give you just a brief history. As we saw in the last session, Orthodox Judaism today has its roots really in Pharisaical Judaism after the Second Temple period. The temple was destroyed, Judaism continued, primarily because of the hermeneutics of the Pharisees. And it developed into what primarily became rabbinical Judaism. And again, that's what they primarily study in their seminaries, is not the Bible, but the Talmud and other rabbinical writings. So how many Orthodox Jews are there in the United States? Well, out of that 2% of the total population that are Jewish, 9% of those identify as Orthodox. That includes the Haredi and modern Orthodox. But out of that 9% who identify as Orthodox, most of them are the Haredim. It's plural for Haredi. So they are the ultra-Orthodox mostly. But notice the population, 9%. They are the smallest group. Now, if you think about it, you can maybe understand why. Remember, we talked about all of the laws and all of the regulations and all of the teachings of the rabbis that they take very seriously and that they try to keep. I don't know about you, but I find it very difficult, as a Christian, where I'm under grace and not under the law. I still find it difficult to obey the Lord in every respect. And when I don't, I go to him in confession, and I believe in 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and righteous to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. But to think of trying to keep all 613 commandments that are found in the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, plus the 18 volumes of the Talmud, plus all the other rabbinical writings, that would just blow my mind. So you can understand why the Orthodox only comprise 9%. Just speaking of the Haredi, the word Haredi means one who trembles, meaning they're trembling in awe of God. So it's kind of a neat word, actually. Their communities, just to be a little bit more specific, tend to be more insular and culturally fixed. In other words, their culture doesn't change much. The ultra-Orthodox or Hasidic branch of Judaism really began in the 17th century in Poland, and a lot of their culture hasn't changed much. I know this is maybe an oversimplification, but I describe them to help me understand and maybe to help others understand. I describe the Haredi generally as the Jewish version of the Amish. The Amish, in terms of their community, they stay together, they tend to be more insular, and in their dress and their culture, it tends to remain the same. Modern Orthodox Jews, however, how refer to themselves as modern Orthodox, they may still outwardly identify as observant, such as they'll be in public wearing a kippah, which is a Hebrew for a skull cap in English, or yarmulke in Yiddish. So they may wear a kippah in public, and they will also try to keep the Judaic law, but at the same time, they will try to engage with the secular culture around them. They're not insulated. So that would be modern Orthodox. Giving a good example of a modern Orthodox individual, for those of you that are familiar with him, Ben Shapiro is a conservative podcaster with a company called the Daily Wire. He identifies himself as a modern Orthodox. Now, you may not be able to see it on the picture, but he actually is wearing a black kippah. So he tries to keep all of the Orthodox teachings. So, how many congregations are there in the United States? Well, approximately 2,100 to 2,500. Now, even though they are the smallest group, they have the majority of the congregations. Now, when you think of a congregation, don't think in terms of like mega churches where you have thousands and thousands of people. No. Some of these congregations can be just a few people. In fact, all that they need to get together to form a congregation, what they call a minyan, in order to have enough men together to pray, is 10. So it sounds like a lot of numbers, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a lot of people. There are major yeshivas, which are their higher educational institutions. There's Yeshiva University in New York City. They would consider themselves modern Orthodox. They not only teach rabbinical teachings, but they also have secular courses as well. And then for the Haredi, there is the Beth Medrash Govoha in Lakewood, New Jersey. I'm not as familiar with them, but according to their website, they have over 9,000 enrolled students. That's a lot. In fact, it's probably the largest Haredi yeshiva out there. They also have authorities, rabbinical authorities. Remember, we talked about who gets to decide? Well, they need rabbinical authorities in order to make legal judgments. So in Orthodox Judaism in the United States, they have the Rabbinical Council of America, again, New York City. You'll see a lot of these organizations that I go through here during this session. They're located in New York City. You may know that New York City, the United States, has the largest Jewish population, which is interesting. And that's where the very first Jewish community of 23 Portuguese Jewish people landed when they fled Brazil, when the persecution started there, the Inquisition started there. They fled Brazil, and 23 of them were blown off course on their ship. They landed in what was then New Amsterdam, which became New York City. So most of them have stayed there in New York City. But the Rabbinical Council of America is a modern Orthodox authority. Then you have also the Orthodox Union, which is modern Orthodox. And so if you ever go to the grocery store and you buy something, if you've never done this, I encourage you to do it. Or if you have done it and you've seen something on, let's say, a jar of food or whatever it is that you're getting, and there's a little circle with two letters in it, OU. That's what this comes from, Orthodox Union. In other words, this particular item has been inspected by rabbinical authorities, and it has been permitted to be classified as kosher or to be neutral. So you may see that on some of your things, but that's where it comes from, Orthodox Union. The Haredi don't have so much a central rabbinical authority union or council, because many of them in their particular sects will follow their specific Rebbe. The word Rebbe means rabbi, but he's like the ultimate rabbi. He's like the chief rabbi. He's like the very top one. And so they will follow what he says. So when you talk about the Chabad, we mentioned them earlier in Crown Heights, they don't really have a Rebbe right now because their Rebbe, Menachem Schneerson, who many of them believed was the Messiah, he passed away in 1994. And they consider him even today as the ultimate rabbi. So it really depends with the Haredi as to who they will follow and consider their authority. Now, the Orthodox have some common core beliefs, despite all of their differences, and they do have a lot of differences even among themselves. Their common core beliefs are based on the teachings of a rabbi from the Middle Ages by the name of Rambam. That is an acronym for his real name, Moses ben Maimonides. From Moses to Moses, there's never been anybody like Moses. So that saying says from the Moses of the Torah to Moses ben Maimonides, there's never been anybody like Moses ben Maimonides. So he's very elevated. He put together kind of a 13 principles of faith, kind of a condensed version of what Orthodox Judaism stands for. So I'm just going to read these off real quickly, and you can find these online. Number one, a belief in the existence of God. Okay. A belief in God's unity, meaning God is one, he's unique and indivisible. Now, let me just stop here and just say that, in my opinion, so since Maimonides, the Rambam, lived in the 12th century, there were about 1,100 years of Christianity that had come down the pike. So he was familiar with the beliefs of Christianity. And in my opinion, the way that he expresses some of these 13 principles is to express it in a way to make a clear distinction between the Jewish people and what the Christians believe. So he emphasizes God's unity. He's one. In other words, unlike the Christian, he is not a triune God. Now, excuse me, this is an area where many of our Jewish friends they really misunderstand us. We do not believe in three gods. We believe in one God who exists in a Godhead of three persons, all co-equal, co-eternal. But again, some of these, I believe, he wrote in such a way to make that clear distinction. Number three, a belief in God's incorporeality, meaning God has no physical form or body, unlike Yeshua or Jesus, who became God in the flesh. Number four, a belief in God's eternality. Number five, only God may be worshiped, no intermediaries. Worship is directed to God alone. Okay, the New Testament teaches that there is one mediator between God and man, and that is the man Christ Jesus. So again, this was, I think, stated in such a way to make a clear distinction between Judaism and the Christian faith. A belief in prophecy, meaning God communicates with humanity through chosen prophets. And there is a belief that Moses was the greatest of all prophets. His prophecy is true and supreme. Therefore, you have the belief that the Torah was given by God to Moses. Okay, we believe that. The last time we saw that they believe in two Torahs, the written and the oral Torah. But they believe also, according to Maimonides, in the immutability of the Torah, meaning the Torah is eternal, unchanging. That's what immutability means. I was on a plane once talking to a Haredi gentleman sitting next to me. We were on our way to Israel, and we were talking about Yeshua. And I mentioned, he was making the case that the Torah would never be changed. And that's why he had a problem with Yeshua, because he came along and, from his perspective, made changes to the Torah, even though Yeshua said, I did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. But at the same time, he made statements, and we'll get into that in the next session, where I can understand where my Jewish friend would say he tried to change the Torah. Well, I then pointed out to him the prophet Jeremiah in chapter 31, where God says that in the future, he is going to make a new covenant with Israel, not like the old covenant, the one at Mount Sinai, but he's going to make a new covenant. So I pointed that out to my Haredi friend, and he really didn't know how to answer that. But this is how they view the Torah. Number 10, a belief that God knows all human actions and thoughts. A belief in the divine reward and punishment. Okay, some of these we would agree with, right? A belief in the coming of the Messiah. And Maimonides gives some specific qualifications for the Messiah. And one of those is that he will come and restore Israel and restore peace to the world. And from their perspective, that's one reason why they discount Yeshua as being the Messiah. They don't see a restoration of Israel, and they don't see peace in the world. They also believe, number 13, in the resurrection of the dead. The dead will be brought back to life in the Messianic age. So those are the common core beliefs of the Orthodox. Let me just give one more observation about Orthodox Judaism. Orthodox Jews do not prefer to be called Orthodox. I don't know if you know that, but the reason is since to them, their religious expression has always been historical Judaism. It's only been because of more recent deviations from Judaism that distinguishing terminology has been necessary. So from their perspective, they're just doing Judaism the way it's always been done. But then you have deviations from that, and therefore you have to have this distinction. And that brings us to Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism, by the way, when you say that, it's not to be said like or confused with Reformed Christians. Okay, we're not talking about Reformed Judaism. It's called Reform Judaism. Their history actually began in Germany in the early 1800s as a response to the Enlightenment that was taking place and the emancipation of Jews in Europe. So they were experiencing a lot of freedom. And as a result of that, religiously, a lot of the Jewish people living there in Germany, they wanted to be freed from all of the yoke of the Torah, the way the Apostle Peter described it in Acts chapter 15. These Jewish people at that time wanted to be freed from that as well, along with all the other freedoms they were experiencing in Europe. Well, eventually it spread from Germany to the United States as well in the mid-1800s. The population of Reformed Jews in the United States is 37% of U.S. Jews identify as Reformed. So if they're going to identify as any type of branch of Judaism, they are the largest of any of the three mainline branches, 37%. Reform Judaism actually sought to modernize Jewish practice, emphasize ethics over ritual, and to make worship more accessible and relevant to Jews living in a secular modern world. And this is why you'll have men and women sitting together. You'll have different types of musical instruments. In Orthodox synagogues, there's no musical instruments. It's all a cappella. You'll have very possibly a female rabbi. You won't have that in Orthodox. And the female, as we mentioned last session, may even be a lesbian. At the very least, supporting LGBTQ philosophies. So this is Reform Judaism. They have almost 850 congregations in the United States and Canada. Now, that's smaller than the congregation number that you saw with the Orthodox. But again, the Orthodox have smaller groups where the Reform have a smaller number, but larger groups that attend. Their major higher educational institution is Hebrew Union College, which is in Cincinnati, Ohio, established in 1875. Other locations are Jerusalem, Los Angeles, and New York. They have the Union for Reform Judaism. It's not so much a rabbinical authority that from the top down tells people what to do. It's more of an organizational authority. And according to the Union for Reform Judaism website, the core principle of faith for Reform Judaism is that they maintain faith in the covenant between God and Israel, as expressed over the generations in the teachings of an ever-evolving Torah and tradition. Reform Judaism seeks to be the living expression of those teachings. It welcomes all who seek Jewish connection to pursue a life of meaning as inspired by the divine and proclaimed in the truths grasped by Jewish teachers throughout time. Now, that sounds pretty nice. I mean, it sounds like, okay, we want to maintain our faith in the covenant between God and Israel, but they make a lot of changes, a lot of changes. And this is why conservative Judaism developed. Conservative Judaism really is a mid-19th century reaction in Germany to the extreme abandonment of traditional Judaism by Reform Judaism. They felt like Reform Judaism went too far. Where Orthodox Judaism will keep kosher, have a whole system of kashrut, where there are things that you can eat and things that you cannot eat. And the whole system is based on 3 verses in the Torah that says you shall not boil a kid or a small goat in its mother's milk. That's repeated, it's mentioned 3 times. So they have a whole system of kashrut. So they have separate sinks, separate cutlery, separate dishes, separate ovens, so that they do not accidentally mix meat dishes with milk dishes. That's keeping kosher. Well, the Reform went to the other way, to the point where, hey, take me to Red Lobster. I like Red Lobster. Shrimp cocktail. Oh, yeah, for sure. Ham sandwiches, no problem there. So this was quite a change. And there were other extremes that the Reform branch went to. And the conservatives said, this is too much. We need to keep some of our traditions. Their population, even though it's less than the Reform, they're still larger than the Orthodox in the United States. 17% identify as conservative. So what they basically do is they seek to find a middle road between Orthodox and Reform Judaism. I would say they're kind of straddling the fence. But as time has gone on, they've continued to lean more toward Reform Judaism, so much so that you can't hardly tell the difference between the 2 branches of conservative and Reform anymore. In fact, the Jewish expression, eat kosher but think treif, which means non-kosher, really encapsulates the ideology of conservative Judaism, where you're trying to straddle the fence. They have about 560 congregations in the United States, but they are continuing to decline. The Jewish Theological Seminary is their higher educational institution in New York City, established in 1886. Their organizational authority is the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, again in New York. And their common core principles of faith is they emphasize Jewish peoplehood and religious observance. Their services are usually conducted in Hebrew, unlike the Reform, which are in English. But the conservative may include English. And like the Reform, conservative are more egalitarian, women rabbis, mixed seating. But they also have a strong emphasis on Jewish education. The Jewish Theological Seminary is a very highly respected seminary, and communal responsibility. So what I'd like to do in the time that we have left is I'd like to compare the belief systems. Remember last time I said Judaism today emphasizes more practice. If you're going to do it at all, it's more of what you do rather than what you believe. But underlying it, there still is some belief, some theology, if you will. So I'd like to compare the belief systems between the Orthodox and the Reform branches of Judaism. And I'm not going to throw in the conservative because, as I said, they're somewhere between the 2, although more and more they're leaning Reform. So I'm not going to touch on the conservative. So let's start with the doctrine of the scriptures. Well, the Orthodox believe both the oral and the written law are given by God. However, there are varying degrees of inspiration, with the Pentateuch, the Torah, ranking the highest. You have the Torah ranks the highest in inspiration. Then you have the prophets, then you have the writings. The Reform branch says the inspiration of both the oral and written law is not true. They reject that idea. These laws are merely literature from which moral ethics may be derived. The doctrine of God. The Orthodox say the oneness of God is stressed. The Trinity, the triune nature of God, is rejected. Monotheism is considered by some Jewish people as Judaism's gift to the religions of the world. God offered the Torah and the belief in one God to the Jewish people. They took it while the Gentile nations rejected it. So their belief in a one God is their gift to the world from their perspective. And God is personal. While the Reform, God is considered to be impersonal, or to some, even non-existent. He may be a force or power. The doctrine of man. To the Orthodox, man has both good and evil inclinations. By doing good and obeying the law, he can overcome his evil side. Some of you may remember old cartoons where somebody is debating whether to do something, and on one side he's got a little angel, and the other side he's got a little devil, and they're both telling him to do one or the other. This is kind of like this good and evil inclination, according to the Orthodox. The Reform say that man has a divine spark, which, being fanned by education, flames into the actualization of man's potential. Man is evolving, and he's continually progressing. As far as the doctrine of sin, the Orthodox believe sin is committed by breaking God's commandments. There is no original sin or inherited sin nature that you get from Adam. To the Reform, sin is merely the ills of society. There is no sin. There's no original sin or inherited sin nature. But what about salvation? To the Orthodox, salvation is obtained through prayer, repentance, and good deeds. That came about especially after the destruction of the temple in AD 70. No more sacrifices, no more priesthood, no more temple. What are you going to do to get atonement? The rabbi said prayer, repentance, and good deeds. It may also be obtained by being born into the Jewish religion. The Reforms say that salvation comes by improving oneself and society. About the Messiah. Well, the Orthodox are expecting a personal Messiah. He's going to be superhuman, sort of like a Superman, but he's not going to have a divine nature. He will glorify Israel and he'll judge the world. But the Reform, instead of a personal Messiah, they're expecting a golden messianic or utopian age that's established by man. That's, again, achieving his full potential, all of that. That's what they anticipate, a messianic age. And then finally, life after death. The Orthodox believe that making the most of life here and now should be stressed, more than thinking about life after death. There will be a physical resurrection to what they call the Messianic age, the time of the Messiah, where the righteous are rewarded and the wicked punished. The Reform, on the other hand, say that the only way to live on after you die is to be remembered by other people through one's accomplishments and associations. Over the years, I've been to a lot of Jewish funerals, and it breaks my heart because the only way that the rabbi can comfort the people that are there is, especially if they're Reform or conservative, all that they can say is they'll live on in our memories. May their memory be blessed. They can't say, we know they're with the Lord today. They can't say that. So it's very sad. So I want to close by just sharing with you, wrapping all of this up. You have all of these different expressions of Judaism today. Do they have anything in common? I'm going to give you 5. There may be more, but I'm going to just focus on 5. Number 1, they do have a shared history and heritage. even though some of them have strayed from orthodoxy, they have a shared history and heritage. Secondly, they do have a growing awareness of the rise of the hatred of Jews in our societies today. It's anti-Semitism. What's going to come of that? We don't know. But historically, persecution of Jewish people has often been the impetus for increased immigration elsewhere, especially to Israel. So if this continues to grow here in the United States, it wouldn't surprise me if you have really for the first time a large wave of immigration to Israel of the Jewish people because they won't feel safe here anymore. Number three, most are supportive of the only Jewish state in the world, which is Israel. But it's interesting, not all of them are. The Haredi Satmar are actually anti-Zionists. They're against Israel because they believe that a Jewish state that's founded by anyone other than the Messiah is not to be supported. On the other hand, the Haredi Chabad group, they would be non-Zionist, but not anti-Zionist. So they will still support Jewish life in the Jewish state. So most of Jewish people today, they'll support the only Jewish state, which is Israel. Number four, they believe in what's called Tikkun Olam. They have a mandate for that. Tikkun Olam means repair the world. So they believe this is their mandate. And that can mean anything. What does it mean to repair the world? It can mean, as the Chabad group says, it can mean you partner with God, that God actually needs you to repair the world, to bring about, and really when it happens, their version, according to the Chabad, is really a version of what we call in Christianity postmillennialism, where you bring in this repair of the world, and it finally gets to the point where it's so good and repaired that the Messiah then comes. But others would say repair the world just means social justice. You're a social justice advocate, or you just try to make the world a better place and everything in between. So that's what number five is, or excuse me, number four. And then number five, the final one, is they do agree on this. 60%, according to a Pew Research Center survey in 2013, 60%, that's almost 2/3 of Jewish people here in the United States, and I'm sure that's pretty much everywhere, said you can't believe in Jesus or Yeshua, his Hebrew name, and still have a Jewish identity. So faith in Yeshua is incompatible with a Jewish identity, which is interesting because you can be a member, you can be totally non-observant of Judaism, and still it's okay that you say, I have a Jewish identity. You can be an agnostic or an atheist, and it's still okay to be have a Jewish identity. But if you say, I believe in Yeshua, who is a Jewish rabbi, then who claimed to be the Messiah, then that's incompatible. And sadly, that is a dichotomy, a sad dichotomy, a disappointing dichotomy that we're going to address in the next session. In this session, we looked at the expressions of Judaism today. And in our next session, we will evaluate Judaism today from an evangelical Christian perspective. And I hope you can join us then.